Am I on? All right. Good morning, everyone. Please settle in. Our service is going to begin right now. Please pardon us. We were having a hard time putting our Zoom app in worship mode. But if you're having trouble seeing us or hearing anything, well, if you can't hear, good luck to you. But if you're having trouble seeing us, you might want to try exiting out of your Zoom app and restarting the Zoom app, or also looking into whether or not your app needs to be updated. And I would love to give instructions on how to update it but everybody has a different system that they're using. So please look into ways to update your app, because apparently that is the nature of the problem that Zoom has updated in the last 24 hours, and it's causing problems for people to log in. So if you can't hear us or see us, try restarting Zoom. But we're gonna forge ahead. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the South Jersey Shore, a welcoming and inclusive faith community. We'd like to welcome any guests we have today. Thank you for taking a chance and bearing with us with these technical difficulties that we've had. My name is Michael Clough, and I'm your associate this morning. I'm a member of this congregation and currently serve it in a number of ways, from technical help to playing guitar to designing the Black Lives Matter sign. We'll be led this morning by our minister, Reverend Don Fortune. Video of today's service will be available on our website and Facebook page later today. If you care to tweet during today's service, Reverend Don's Twitter handle is Queer Preacher, and you can use the hashtag UUCSJS if you like. Also, if you want to let us know of your joys and concerns, you can use the Zoom app. All you have to do is type them into your chat box area on your screen. Just look for the chat icon at either the top or bottom of your app. Click it and leave a comment and see what others have said. Welcome.
learned to love it. No storm can shake my inmost calm. I hear the music ringing. It sounds and echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?
Welcome. Welcome into this place of healing. Welcome into this place of challenge and growth. Welcome into this place of imperfection and aspiration. I want to remind you that here you are whole in your brokenness. Here you are holy in your shame. Here you are wholly loved as you are. I ask you to join me in a moment of reflection as I light our chalice with these words. They're by Linda Barnes. Suspended between all that was and all that might be, we struggle to find this very moment, to live this very moment. Let us sit together for a moment and savor this moment. Let us relish this between time where past meets future. Let us harbor a faith that reminds us that right now, right here, is enough. I'm going to ask you now to sing along at home with our gathering hymn as Mary Ann shares the screen.
from this time we share with love and care. We give thanks for this precious day. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. We give thanks for this precious day.
Thank you. I had some trouble getting on today, so I'm glad that I made it in time for my story. Um, so today I'm going to tell you something a little bit different. There are many theories about the nature of humankind, and different cultures have different ways of thinking about who we are and how we act. Are we inherently good or bad? Do we need a strict set of rules and a firm authoritative ruler? Are we at the core just selfish creatures only looking out for ourselves? The Western opinion of humans, well, Christianity gives us original sin. Philosophers like Thomas Hobbes tell us all people are selfish, and American and European history gives us plenty of examples of the evil things humans can do to one another. Every year, 8th graders around the United States get to read that classic novel, The Lord of the Flies. Okay, so this novel, written by William Golding, it tells the tale of a group of English boarding school boys who crash on a deserted island with no surviving adults. Now, at first, this seems like a dream come true. They set up a society they're familiar with, an established leader, a set of rules to govern their behavior. But then things take a terrible turn. Arguments, physical fights, chaos, eventually murder. This novel has been held up as a cautionary tale of the breakdown of society, a mirror of the true nature of humankind. But is it? In the 1950s, right around the time Golding was writing this novel, a Harvard psychologist was designing summer camps for boys to test these theories out. Dr. Muzaffar Sharif set out to see if competition and animosity would drive people into conflict, but still allow for cooperation when common obstacles were put in their way. Now, these experiments had a lot of problems, and modern researchers would cringe at all the things that were wrong with these two experiments. But here's the thing. These experiments took boys into isolated forests away from their families, created a system of tribalism, set up conflict and rivalry, and in one of the cases documented actual hatred of the other group. But when their water supply was cut off, a scenario set up by the researchers in the experiment, the boys from the two groups worked together to locate and solve the problem. So fast forward a bit to 1965, and we get an example of the real-life Lord of the Flies, sort of. In June of that year, 6 schoolboys from the capital city of Tonga set out for adventure in a borrowed fishing boat. They became lost in a storm and drifted for 8 days with no food and no water. They finally landed on a long abandoned island about 100 miles to the southwest of Tonga. But you know what? Unlike that novel, chaos did not reign on this island. These boys survived 15 months before being found by a passing ship. The boys aged 13 through 16 set up shelters, a garden, a water collection system. They redomesticated chickens that were left behind when the previous inhabitants of the island were all kidnapped and sold into slavery generations before. The story of their time on the island has unfortunately been taken and told by the ship's white captain and by the white author who recently discovered their story. And the Tongan boy's story has only been told through this lens. Maybe, so far, hopefully. Anyway, Tongan writers have taken to the internet to let the rest of us know that this story is not unknown to Tongans. It's a story that parents have passed down to their children since the boys returned home in 1966. Although their families assumed that they died at sea, when they were found and they told their stories about life on the island, no one in Tonga was surprised that they had survived. You see, it's like Melaika Gesa writes, that Tongans are taught to share from the beginning and to treat everyone like family. You're taught to survive together, not every man for himself. It's hard to exist without community. We're humbled by nature and hold a lot of respect for our elders and women, especially the matriarchs of our families. We're generous and emphatic people who are somehow always smiling. All of this is tied to what I later learned in life is called Anga Whakatonga, the Tongan way. In this time of a global pandemic, I know that some of us are feeling trapped, isolated, and lonely. We want this to end so badly for that ship to sail over the horizon and rescue us. Like the Tongan boys and their Anga Whakatonga, we can look to our UU values to help us survive. First and foremost, we trust in science. We know that there are incredibly smart people working hard to provide us with the information we need to know. And we know that we can use critical thinking to evaluate information and sources. We value all people, and as Unitarian Universalists, our faith calls to us to use our privilege to help those facing oppression, like right now, essential workers, people who don't have enough food or enough money to pay their bills, and those deemed high risk of this virus. We know that we are all connected, that my mask protects you and your mask protects me. Our covenant holds us together in the congregational community, but our goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice calls us to act in the wider society, to follow our theology of love. Our island will not fall in chaos, but will thrive with compassion.
Thank you, Jess. That was a great story. That was very inspiring and helpful in these times. During this next musical interlude, we invite you to write your joys or sorrows in the chat area of the Zoom app. You should see the chat icon on the top or on the bottom of the app. Click it and type in what you'd like to share. After the music, Reverend Dawn will read what you shared. Please remember that this entire service will be posted to the internet for all eternity, so please do not share details that you do not want the world to see.
Separated as we are by distance, we are joined this morning in spirit, brought together to seek comfort and encouragement and to share those things in our lives that bring us joy or cause us sorrow. We had the sad news this week that the UU congregation of the South Jersey Shore has lost its first member to the coronavirus. Longtime member Meg Bryant died this week of COVID-19. Now, I spoke with Betsy Seawright earlier this week and asked her to share a few words about Meg at this time, but I don't know if technologically, we've got Betsy either available or able to log on. I'm going to ask Marianne, can you check to see if you can find Betsy and turn on her microphone if so? And let me know one way or the other.
I've unmuted Betsy.
Okay, Betsy, can you share with us this morning? She might not be able to hear. All right. Okay, well, if you mute Betsy, I will go back to the memories that Betsy shared with the Margaret Circle group she shared with me. Meg Bryant joined the UUCSJS 10 years ago on May 30th, 2010, which is just in a couple weeks. When she joined, she said she was really rejoining. She and her husband, John, had joined originally on Charter Sunday, but they stopped coming a little while afterwards. She was reintroduced, or almost want to say evangelized back in through her dear friend Maxine Blumenthal. And she rode to church, she and John rode to church with Maxine often. The Bryants lived up in Perry Lake, the community for seniors in Manahawkin, and Meg was in the Genesis nursing care facility in the Manahawkin area for the last several years of her life. Excuse me. She had a stroke and ended up living there where she could get the care that she needed. One of the first things that Meg would say about herself, according to Betsy's notes, is that she's a passionate feminist. And she became a feminist in the 1960s when she left the Republican Party and joined the Democratic Party. And I'm reading through the notes here. She was very concerned about the state of poor women trying to earn as much money as men for doing the same job. She was also an advocate for LGBT rights, and she claimed Gloria Steinem as her heroine. Now, let me get back here. I confess, I'm sorry I never had a chance to meet Meg in person. She was already living in the nursing home when I got called here, and I asked about her, and I was told that at that time she really did not want visitors. I did get a chance to speak with her husband, John, this week. I see that he is logged in this morning on Meg's account. He told me that he's doing well and that he sends his appreciation for all the cards and outreach from the members of the congregation that he has received. We hold him and his family and all who loved Meg in our hearts this week. We have another significant bit of news this week also. I'm sure many of you have already heard, but I want to share with you the recent news from our president, our Unitarian Universalist Association President, Susan Frederick Gray. Reverend Gray and the Board of Trustees of the UUA are called to lead our member congregations and the people in them in ways that enrich and sustain us spiritually, and in this case, physically. Having examined the scientific predictions and models, the UUA, on the advice, after listening to the experts at the Centers for Disease Control, the UUA is recommending that congregations not meet again in person until it is safe to do so, namely when infection rates and deaths are down, and when a successful and accessible treatment is available and/or a viable vaccine is approved and distributed. With this in mind, Reverend Gray and the leadership of our denomination this week recommended that all congregations plan on conducting all church activities online until May of 2021. Now that's a big thing to consider, I know. It will mean a lot of reimagining what it means to be a religious community. The full text of President Frederick Gray's letter is available on the UUA website and will probably be in the next edition of the UUA World magazine, which is mailed to the homes of all members of UU congregations. These are trying times, and they're going to last longer than any of us might have imagined. We are reminded once more that we are in this together, even if we are apart from one another physically. I will now read aloud the joys and concerns that you have shared in the chat box. Kip Marlowe offering tech advice. Yes, I saw that. A lot of these came in while I was reading about Meg. Karen York is wishing continued strength and healing to Kathleen. We all wish that. Stephen McGahee said that Tara is happy that her dad made her a zip line. Wow. So Steve, yeah, that sounds like fun. Good for her. Good for him. That's all I see on the chat list this morning. I'm sure there are others, but technology is being a bit of a challenge. So I invite you now to join me in the spirit of prayer. Blessed and holy creation, universe of wonder, mystery beyond name, we share our joys and our sorrows, longing for the time when we will once more be able to place stones in the water and around the light of our chalice. Our hearts are touched by this shared ritual, and we are connected. We hold in our hearts this week particularly the families of the almost 90,000 people in the United States who have died from complications from the coronavirus. We hold in our hearts those who are at particular risk and those who, for one reason or another, do not take the precautions that are being recommended. We pray for those who have been at the Jersey Shore this weekend, enjoying the warm weather, but not participating in the precautions that are being recommended. And we pray that we lose no more. We pray that we don't see another spike in infections and sickness and death. We pray, as we do every week, for the health and long life of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We pray for those who are at home in family situations that are unhealthy or abusive and unable to leave. We pray for children whose refuge was school, who are now not able to leave the house. We pray for those who are unemployed or who are required to go to work and can't refuse because they need the money, because they need the health insurance. We hold all who are suffering in our hearts. We offer all of these and those joys and sorrows that remain unspoken in our hearts into the care of the universe. May our joys be multiplied and our sorrows diminished in this sharing. Amen.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my
We'll now take a moment to give and receive the morning offering that looks and feels a little different when we're separated by distance. Rather than placing a check or cash in the basket, I ask you to consider a generosity practice of sending a check to our P.O. box or arranging a regular payment be sent through our bank. You can also use the donate button that is located on our website to make a contribution. Your financial support is essential since 80% of our income to pay expenses comes from the contributions of our members and friends. We honor the voluntary generosity of the congregation and remind you that no matter how those gifts are offered, they are always most gratefully received.
Our reading today is a piece called Uncharted Waters by Margaret Pelling from a collection of writing called Waiting to be Discovered. At the end of the reading, we'll enter a time of quiet contemplation before today's sermon. Do not imagine you can keep a boat afloat by hiding below the deck, eyes closed, hands over ears, pretending you are on dry land. Where you started from is land, and land is where you will finish. But your now, all is wide ocean, and the wind is rising. You must choose a course, this way or that. Toss the tarnished coin which you will find beside the tiller. Do not wonder where the compass is. There is no instrument aboard this boat but that coin. Heads or tails, toss the coin and go. If the other way was better, you'll never know. If the wind is with you, run before it while you can. But keep a sharp lookout for reefs and learn to smell a storm coming. Know when to furl the sail and let the anchor hold you. The wind will blow so hard at times you'll long for doldrums weather, to swim and contemplate the stars. You'll forget an oily sea will have you praying that a butterfly will deign to flap a wing. When you sight land, press on with all sail set. Foreign as your journey's end may seem, this is the place. Beach the boat, disembark, and don't look back. You are expected.
Trapped. This is the sermon topic that Jack and Barbara Miller chose. They won the bidding competition at last year's service auction and got to choose a topic for a sermon. And they chose the notion of being trapped. And it is certainly timely. And I have to say this topic has been percolating in my head for a couple of weeks. I am grateful for their contribution to the congregation's financial support in the auction and for the inspiration of this topic. Anne Frank spent 2 years hiding in an attic with her family, but never lost her faith in humanity. Viktor Frankl spent years in Auschwitz and came away moved by the kindness the other prisoners showed to one another, inspired by the generosity of the heart when there were no material things that could be offered. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison for his work as an anti-apartheid revolutionary before being released, when he went on to become South Africa's first democratically elected president and the first Black person to hold a high office. Despite his horrible treatment, Mandela emerged a man of patience, unbroken, peaceful, prepared to move his country forward without violence or vengeance against the colonizers who so oppressed that land for more than a century. So what is it that those individuals did that allowed them to not just survive their time of imprisonment, but to remain spiritually centered and not fall into despair and anger? Now, what does it mean to be trapped? First off, what does that mean? For me, being trapped means having my freedom of movement, my physical movement, restricted in a way that I cannot overcome or work around. Words like caged or imprisoned come to mind, threatened, backed into a corner with no escape. If I close my eyes and pay attention to my body, I can feel my chest tighten and my muscles tense. I can feel my breathing shift as my body prepares for flight or fight. It is a state of heightened awareness, even what psychologists will call hypervigilance. And that kind of response is fairly typical for people in dangerous places where they feel they have no escape. Many of us had this sort of reaction a couple months ago when all the quarantine measures first took effect. The adrenaline powered us through. We stocked up on rice and pasta and dried beans and toilet paper. I'm still not sure what the toilet paper was about for a respiratory infection, but okay. It was all very exciting, this idea of staying home all the time, and we got into the swing of it. People rediscovered arts and crafts. People started baking bread again. There was a run on flour and yeast in the supermarkets. Lacking yeast, people rediscovered the joy of sourdough. At first, we imagined we'd be back to normal in a month or two at the most. Homemade bread for a couple of months before summer vacation didn't sound like a bad gig after all. But this has turned out to be something very different from what we expect. I don't think any of us ever has experienced this kind of restriction before. Even our eldest members can barely recall the rationing of food and consumer supplies during World War II. Since that time, we have not experienced anything that requires the kind of nationwide personal sacrifice and commitment that will be necessary for us to survive this pandemic. You know, and humans are human. We are complex, imperfect beings. We are capable of unthinkable cruelty and unimaginable grace. And we will probably come through this much like the generation that came through the Great Depression of the 1930s. The hardship and heartbreak that generation survived is nothing we can imagine yet in our modern understanding of life. And I think about the people I knew growing up who had survived that time. Many of them had some odd habits. I know lots of grandmothers who saved tinfoil, carefully wiping it clean and folding it to be stored for its next use. People would save even the tiniest bits of leftover food. Nothing was too small to tuck into the freezer to supplement a future soup or stew, no matter how curious or strange the combination of ingredients. Nothing was to be wasted. The internet is filled with information on how to be frugal and how to feed the family on a tight budget and how to survive economically. Grow a garden, learn to can and preserve food, choose carefully, don't buy disposable things. Grow or sow or build your own things. Trade with your neighbors. Use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. I remember hearing that growing up. But that's the easy stuff. How do we manage to survive this experience with our hearts intact? And I don't know that I have the answer to that. So many Unitarian Universalist sermons start with an idea and end with more questions. Mandela wrote, "Prison life is about routine. Each day like the one before, each week like the one before it, so that the months and years blend into each other." We've been at this thing 2 months, and already I don't know what day of the week it is. Most days. Sundays I know I have to wear this shirt, but the rest of the week just all sort of blurs together. And each person copes in our own way. We'll get through, some better than others. For what it's worth, I want to offer you that self-medicating with chemicals or other addictive behavior is probably not a success vector for the long term. I mean, do what you have to in a pinch. I recommend that everyone have more than one coping strategy, particularly if that one involves wine. The foundation of my house, this little house I have in Egg Harbor City, the foundation of my house was poured on May 29th, 1929, just 3 months before the stock market began to crumble and ultimately crash. I think about that time and I wonder what it was like for a new home builder in Egg Harbor City, emerging just as the economy tanked. What were that man's fears? How did he feed his family? How did the people in this community cope? This was all before the New Deal, and the thought of a government bailout program for individuals was not something anyone could imagine. They just knew it was bad, and there didn't seem to be an end in sight. How did they manage that? Beyond the vegetables and the victory gardens, how did they manage their hearts? And if we keep in mind that just a decade prior to that, the world had experienced the influenza pandemic of 1918, in which millions of people died. So hardship and fear and restrictions on all kinds of things were not unfamiliar in 1929, but still, it is beyond my 21st century brain's capacity to imagine what that must have been like. Not everyone had telephones. Most people had electricity, I imagine, but radios, good ones, were a luxury. Television had not yet been invented. There were few sources of information. It must have been grim indeed. Now, we of this era and age are at the very beginning of an experience that will shape history and our culture forever. In times past, hardship and sacrifice were relatively common. Most families have survival stories of one sort or another, of immigration in Ellis Island, sons and fathers fighting in the Civil War, tenement slums, hardscrabble farms, polio, the Dust Bowl, discrimination, segregation, burned crosses. We all know those stories. Now, though, 3/4 of a century after the end of World War II, we've not had to experience sacrifice on such a grand national cultural scale. And this is very, very new to us. It is a new feeling of being trapped. And we will spend some time learning how to adapt to this new reality, and it will be uncomfortable. I have to say, there are some Sundays when I feel like all I ever do is challenge everyone to lean into the discomfort of one kind of growth or another. But this is something different. This is not voluntary discomfort. This is discomfort that's going to happen whether we embrace it or fight it every step of the way. Psychologists and theologians have pondered for years the different ways people come through difficult experiences. I think too often we point to the Lord of the Flies novel as an example of what happens when humanity is severely challenged. But honestly, I think the world is a lot more like those kids at summer camp who refused to hurt each other when things got tough. I think the world is more like those boys from Tonga who played hooky on a school afternoon, nicked a small sailboat, and ended up stranded for a year and a half on an island. Those children, those those at summer camp and those on the island, they indicate to me that humanity's default setting is not cruelty and greed, but connection and generosity. And in all the reading I have done on the topic of being trapped, and let me tell you, it is not always cheerful reading. All the reading of being isolated, being imprisoned, surviving with one's soul intact, the common thread that runs through it all is the willingness of the survivors to work communally and set aside personal goals and agendas, to care about others. Our national culture and our Unitarian Universalist culture celebrate the individual rights and freedoms of liberty and opportunity, of choice and consent, individualism. Now, those things are important, but I think we sometimes pay homage to them at the expense of some of our other principles, the ones that will help us survive this pandemic and the inevitable financial fallout it will bring. Those other principles, the interconnectedness of all humans and beings and the earth itself, the call to be compassionate and equitable in our relationships with one another, and the secular voice, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. These notions are also solidly rooted in our national and religious identities, and they are things that will bring us through this time. Even though we are gathered here in an electronic forum, each in our own homes, we are connected. I invite you to take a moment and look at all the little windows on your screen. Look at all those little windows. We've got more than 50 little windows into other people's lives. Because of technology, we don't actually get to see their living rooms this morning. But I know that we can look at these names and we can bring to mind their faces and their voices and our relationships with them and what that makes us feel, what we feel when we think of those folks. Take a look at those names. I want you to close your eyes if you are willing and feel the presence of each of those folks in your heart. You are not alone, remember. Each of us is part of the other. We are interconnected in this giant web of existence. I want you to feel that for a moment. All those names, all those people, all those relationships, all those smiles, all those birthdays, all those celebrations, the milestones, the hugs, the loss, the tears, all of it. Go ahead and open your eyes. Look at the names again and the faces on your screen. These are your people. This is the community that will keep you whole through the coming year. These faces, these names, these people, and your family at home and your other circles of support, these are the connections that will get us through. Now, we're each going to do this thing differently, certainly. but connecting with each other is a thing we must do. We are not islands, no matter what the Centers for Disease Control suggests. We can stay physically apart and remain connected through our hearts. We are in a time when many of us are feeling trapped, and I mean really trapped. We're not accustomed to not being able to go where we want, when we want. The challenge is likely to get bigger before it shrinks, and is likely to last longer than any of us wants it to. For some of us, it has already lasted too long. But if we are going to get through this thing whole, and I mean whole in spirit, not necessarily in pocketbook, we're going to get through this whole in spirit and being, we'll do it together. My prayer for you and for all of us is that we treasure and nurture our connections, that we reach out for help when we are lonely or need help, and that we reach out and check on each other when we think of another person. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be connected. And may you be whole. Amen. Closing words this morning come from T.S. Eliot, from Four Quartets, Section 5. What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring, we will arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. I invite you to say with me our words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on. Greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Thank you, Reverend Dawn. It was a wonderful sermon, very meaningful, especially at a time like this. I wanted to share with you all a few announcements. After the announcements, I'll ring the bell to signal the beginning of our coffee hour of socializing and fellowship. Just before, we'll receive a brief update on the status of the pandemic in South Jersey from our own Melissa Hutchison, who is not only a doctor, but is also president of the UUCSJS board. She will answer as many of your technical medical questions about the spread of the coronavirus as she can. But first, these announcements. The next annual meeting of the UUCSJS will happen on Sunday, June 21st, after services. This is the annual meeting where the congregation conducts our independent governance. We will elect leaders and officers and vote on a budget for the coming year. So this is important. After all, our tradition of direct democracy is rooted in our fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in the society at large. Every single congregation in Unitarian Universalism is a freely gathered, self-governing organization, and all have banded together in an international association of congregations called the UUA. Not only does each congregation conduct its business in an annual meeting, the UUA itself has an annual meeting called General Assembly, or GA. Like most things in our world, this year's GA will be happening online in order to keep everyone safe. In the weeks leading up to the UUCSJS's annual meeting, we will provide annual reports and absentee ballots, and we will let you know more about these details as they become firm. A reminder that all events at the UU Center are canceled until further notice. If you'd like to schedule an activity using our Zoom account, reach out to our administrative assistant, Matt, for help with that. As you can imagine right now, our pastoral care team is doing a lot of important work, and they need your help. If you are available to help, please contact Coordinator Tracy Catino. And if you can help, reach out. If you need something, reach out. We are a community, and communities take care of one another. We remind you that we must all continue to remain vigilant, about social distancing and being careful of germs and the potential to spread infection. So please continue to stay home, stay safe, and put the mask over your nose and your mouth. So, oh, and my graphic is missing. Hang on one second. Okay, Marianne's showing the screen with some of the upcoming events. Sunday, of course, we're gonna go back to Zoom at 10 a.m. and hopefully everybody's Zoom app will have been updated by then. Tuesday, calling all kids. Join Ms. Jess for RE Lab at 3 p.m. And I think the pastoral chats, yes, I'm sorry, both the pastoral chats Wednesday and Friday, I'll have an announcement about that shortly, but they're being suspended for now. Thursday, Common Arts for DIY Hearts at 7 p.m. And Friday, calling all kids for Friday Night Fun, also at 7 p.m. Saturday, Buddhist Sangha at 10 a.m. So due to low turnout, public pastoral chat times with Reverend Dawn will be suspended beginning this week. In the fall, Reverend Dawn will offer a new set of online programming options to engage members and friends interested in UU life and in deepening their spiritual world. If you feel you might have the virus, let our pastoral care team and Reverend Dawn know so they can support you. Reverend Dawn is available to provide pastoral counseling by phone or video conference. Please reach out via email, text, or phone to schedule an appointment. So we warmly welcome all of you who are visiting us today. Please stay and socialize in our online social time so we can get to know one another better. Now let us share in a moment of silent reflection to consider today's message and the meaning it has in our lives.